This spectacular series of conversations has been far too fascinating and stimulating and polyphonous for me to try to sum it up in a few sound bites. But I did want to underscore a couple of the themes that we have heard over the last 2 days, themes that I think fittingly enough appeared in the opening keynote address that Vince Cerf gave, and then the keynote address this morning by Brad Smith, both of which framed our conversation, I think, in very useful ways. And I want to start by repeating something that Brad Smith said that I think echoed through many of our conversations, that crystallized things that were premises for what many speakers said. He said, there is no liberty without privacy. And then he emphasized that for all of the threats that we are seeing, it remains the case that while government is not the only threat to our privacy, government power poses a special kind of threat with regard to privacy and liberty. And I think he's right about that because of government's extraordinary power to collect information and because of the different things it can do by virtue of its control over the police and the military when it has information about us. He then said, and it was quoted later in the day, that there is no privacy without law. And I think he's right about that too, whether or not the correct solution is something like the Geneva Convention that he proposed or some other set of regulations on government. Contending with that particular threat requires legal restrictions and rules that continue to protect our privacy and with it our liberty. The quote that I want to take from Vince Cerf's speech, and we've heard it throughout the 2 days. He said it the first morning and then repeated it in a nice kind of bookend to the conference just a few minutes ago, is that ultimately whatever else is true and whatever we do as a matter of regulation and technology, many things, perhaps many of the most important things, will depend on critical thinking. There is, in his words, no substitute for critical thinking. And I want to note, first of all, that there's a certain kind of optimism baked into that statement. Our question up brooding above us here on the technologically advanced stage is whether or not liberty can survive the digital age. Depending on critical thinking is what liberty means. I mean, if you have liberty, it doesn't guarantee you good outcomes. What liberty gives you is the right to make your choices, and it makes you dependent on whether or not you exercise critical thinking. If you get it wrong, you're going to bear the consequences, and if you think better about things, you are more likely to have good outcomes. So there's a certain amount of optimism in thinking that our liberty and democracy depend on critical thinking. Ultimately, it means we think they do survive into the digital age in an important way. But of course, it means there are lots of things that can go wrong, and they may go distinctively wrong as a result of the technologies that we've been discussing over the last couple of days. That's led lots of people to talk about the importance of education, things like civic literacy, things like technological literacy. And of course, I'm a believer in education. I run an educational institution. I've devoted my life to education. I'm happy to hear about the importance of education. But I do worry when I hear these sorts of claims made on its behalf or these kinds of hopes invested in it, that we not oversell what we think it can accomplish. The need for civic literacy, for example, is an old problem, not a new one. On one of the earlier panels, there was discussion of some of the facts about political ignorance in my own country, in the United States. My own favorite fact of that kind, as somebody who works in constitutional theory, is that public opinion polls in the United States regularly and repeatedly show that about 40% of Americans are unable to answer the question, how many senators does your state have? For those of you who are not American, this is just about the easiest question you can imagine. The answer is 2, and it's always 2. It's 2 in every state. It's 2 throughout American history, but about 40% can't get that particular question right. This might have come as a disappointment, but not a surprise to the people who wrote the American Constitution. They were quite worried about whether or not people would have the kind of civic literacy needed to make good choices. And their solution was in part a kind of mistrust. They did not, in fact, trust people to elect senators directly. They thought They would leave that to state legislatures, and they did not trust people to elect the president directly. Or to put it differently, the American founders certainly did not imagine that the Russians could somehow hack an American election. But they did imagine that a major threat to the success of the American government could be elections in which misinformation, appeals to fear, and charisma could lead to the election of a demagogue. That was perhaps their major concern in designing the presidential system. I mention all of that at the conclusion of our proceedings over the last 2 days, not to recommend the particular solutions that the American framers proposed, but just to say that some of what we've been discussing here, and particularly when we've been talking about the need for critical judgment, pertains not to new technological issues, but in fact to issues that are very old and durable. And if I may take a pass at David Sanger's question to Ed Felton here at the end, I would predict that whatever we're saying about technology, policy, and law, we will still be talking about the importance of critical judgment. It will be a sign that liberty has continued to persist, and the answers will remain elusive. It is a durable conversation, and I'm grateful to all of you for participating in what I think has been a very worthwhile instantiation of that conversation over the last 2 days. I want to thank all of you, but I want to thank in particular the people who have invested extraordinary time to make this conference such a success. And so if they're in the room right now, or if they're waiting in the wings out there, I want them to come in a bit so we can applaud them from... Now, I'm going to give you their names. I want you to applaud them, not in anonymity pursuant to Tor here, but Elizabeth Samios, Rose Kelly. Rose? Yes? Okay. Rose Kelly, Leah Holt, all from, where's Leah? No. Pardon? Over there. Okay. Leah Holt. All of them from Princeton University, from the Humboldt International Strategy Office, our partners here, Claudia Schmidt-Memler. And Nina Mikolasek. And finally, and she never puts her own name on the list that she gives to me, but Associate Dean Elizabeth Donahue from the Woodrow Wilson School. I thank them, I thank all of you for what has been a wonderful conference, and I invite you all to join us for a reception, which will be downstairs on the first floor. Thank you for being a part of this. Good night.